My name is Prakash. I represent Stelling. I'm going to take you through the first part of the day. Try and explain to you our approach on warehouse transformation using EWM. And we also have Keith with us. Here is our client who's going to specifically spend the last part of the presentation on his experience with the approach that we've taken. Thanks, Keith, for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me out here, Prakash. It's awesome.
Just to give you a quick look on the agenda that we're trying to cover today, we begin with the perspective on how we approach EWM and how we use that as a tool and leverage while we're doing warehouse transformation. What's worked for us and our clients in the past, and how we kind of build on that and take it forward. How to keep in mind a few things to make sure that your warehouse transformation journey is successful. That's the second part of the presentation. And just some of the other factors that are important while taking on a journey on your transformation, specifically to warehousing. And then we have Heath spend some time with us on his experience with us, with the process that we've been talking about in the first section. And then we'll open up to questions. And please feel free to interrupt anywhere if you feel so. We'll be happy to answer your questions as we go through the presentation. Right? So the fundamental difference in how we approach our EWM projects or transformation projects is that we don't look at it as if it's an IT transformation, IT project alone. Of course, there's an IT angle to it, but we don't believe that it's the only thing that you have to look out for. So when we take on a warehouse transformation project, from the IT perspective, you would be looking at building a scalable, globally, maybe a template, and how you can kind of roll it out across multiple facilities, replace your legacy systems. You would have kind of created a business case around your total cost of ownership on how the EWM system should be rolled out. But that's just one part of the puzzle. It's one piece of the puzzle. The important thing that goes along with it in tandem is the fact that business also should be able to benefit from your transformation in such IT projects. So questions like, how do I reduce my cost to serve? How do I improve my productivity? How do I make my warehouse more efficient in terms of being able to execute demanding and changing customer needs? That's the core of how you define the business outcome that you're looking at when you chalk out a program like this. So the essence of how the goal has been set up when you're taking a transformation like this comes from not just the IT perspective, but also taking the business perspective and blending it well with your overall goal. So what you'll find here that the tools and systems, we believe, is just one of the cogs of the wheels. There are many other elements that must be taken into consideration when you take on a journey like this. For example, your current facility infrastructure. There could be lots of constraints in your facility today, which you have to incorporate as a part of your roadmap for transformation. So some of it might be upgrading these systems, and we will probably talk about some of these things in the latter part as well. How the meshing of all these ultimately results in a higher value that you achieve from taking on a journey like this. So if you were to just focus on the IT part, of course you would have changed your legacy system, taken on a more efficient IT system in place. But if you blend in the business perspective and take on all these factors in a holistic program together, the more bang that you get for your buck comes from the fact that you mesh it up together like this. So that's the fundamental principle based on which we take on EWM segments. So in the last 3.5 years, Stellium has been part of about 16, 17 implementations and rollouts. And in no engagement have we done anything but this approach. And that's really worked for us, and we believe that's the way we want to continue evolving and developing more and how we go forward on these journeys. So the 3-4 things that we would want to cover as a part of this journey is one, that we take a data-driven approach to doing these implementations. So typical blueprinting sessions or the to-be designs that you do would be driven by what you're doing today. You do the other studies, you do the to-be studies, and you kind of figure out. But what we do is at every decision or even if it's a simple decision point, we drive it based on data. So you look at that data, find out how you can influence your to-be process based on some facts. So that's the first important thing that we do, and it's all metric driven. So like I mentioned, if you ask questions on how should I improve my process or how should I change my process, to give me a 5% additional productivity? Those are the kind of questions you'll ask yourself in the way that you take on your implementation. So that's the first point. The second is that when you take on an IT project or you take on a project like this, you use that as an opportunity to re-engineer a process from scratch. Don't live with the legacy and baggage that you have and try and change that from scratch. And be open to that change. You may end up not doing something very significantly different, but at least if you're open up, if you open up to changing or accepting change, then you might end up with lots of other advantages that you would have probably taken for granted had you not thought of it that way. The third and fourth points, if you see in any IT project, the testing and the change management are key levers in making it successful. The focus on testing and change management remains the same in any project like ours. But what we add or how you complement that process is being able to make it a lot more business focused. So the tool has to work well. It has to deliver all its functionalities well. But does it really also achieve your business benefit? Are you testing those business benefit outcomes as a part of your testing methodology? Is what we covered in the testing team. Change and training. A lot has been said and done about it. Some things that we do differently are we don't believe that the change has to be driven only from the top up. We believe that change also comes in from day-to-day interactions bottom up as well. So the fact that we involve users much earlier than they typically would be required helps you bring about that change at an individual person's level and then take it forward during the course of the implementation and hence post-implementation as well. So these are some of the things that we take care of. I'll just spend some time on giving examples of how we do these things in the specific project with client examples as well. So what you see here is an exhaustive list. You don't need to kind of get overwhelmed with the number of items that you see on the slides. Let's just take slotting, for example, in a facility. Slotting is typically how you place your products in your storage systems in your facility. How do you choose which SKUs need to be represented for faster picking, which SKUs need to be kept further away in the warehouse because these are slow movers and things like that. Now, this slotting as a design parameter kind of becomes an input for your EWM to decide how that placement and picking and put away strategy should work in your facility. So the zone definition, the storage mode and sizing, how much space do I assign for each SKU, which location is right, should be closer to the dock or further away from the dock. These are some of the inputs that go into the configurations when it comes to the EWM system. Now, to take these decisions, we begin with something called the SKU profiling. You begin with the SKU profiling by doing multi-dimensional classification. You look at the active and inactive SKUs. You look at the product category mix. How are each products associated or affinity between the products when customers order them, and things like that. Take a view on the SKU profiling and use this data-driven view to kind of decide how your future placement and put away strategy should be. So this is just one example of how data drives the slotting decisions into EWM. The same is applicable for how you plan your waves, how you plan your picking and put away process, how receiving can be improved, and things like that. So next slide, I'll just quickly take you through the illustration on. So this is from a specific client's data. So how you read the table is about 5% of these queues contribute 40% in terms of the order lines and about 90% in terms of the overall throughput in terms of pallet equivalents. So it means in your entire portfolio of 100 SKUs, about 5 SKUs will decide 90% of your throughput volume. So when you look at these two dimensions and you look at how categories of SKUs portray different behaviors, you will realize that I cannot have a one thumb rule operations for the entire facility. You will classify your processes and design your processes for these specific SKUs, for example, these 5, which give you a 90% impact to your entire business. So how we choose this reserve and pick phase determination. How many pick phases do I give for each SKU? How many locations should I give it in the reserve storage? Will be driven by factors like this. For example, these 5% SKUs will get their prime locations in their pick phase and probably multiple pick phases so that the replenishment efforts comes down and be placed closer to the storage areas as well, so that the replenishment efforts slow, and things like that. Yeah? So this is just one example of how we use this two-dimensional classification for an automotive space part facility and improve their slotting in the warehouse. So this is for another customer who was in the business of distribution, apparel and textile products. So what you see here is about the distribution facilities. Customers were Bed Bath & Beyond, Kohl's, Moen, Bonton, and 97% of their dispatches and 95% in terms of lines were coming from these 4 customers. So clearly, it seems to suggest that we need to have dedicated zones where the pick and pass module for these have to be designed. Commonality between SKUs across these businesses were as good as nil. Hence, it means that the SKUs of one should be that dedicated zone. The design of each of these zones, again in the next level, becomes a derivative of how many or what volume you do from each of these areas. For example, Bed Bath & Beyond would probably have 3 lanes dedicated for their pick and pass versus one term with only 1 lane, 2 lanes, and so on and so forth. Had it not been for this kind of analysis, what one would have just assumed is that I would just need a pick pass area where these queues are represented. But perhaps if you look at it in this fashion, you will realize that not only must you give them pick pass, pick faces and areas, but also keep these zones dedicated, because commonality between them anyway doesn't exist, and your picking process can be much more efficient if you kind of do it this way. Yeah. So another thing that we did in the same customer, if you can just link this, is with 1700 articles that exist in the system, do I need to give 1700 representative pick face locations for them or not? But when we see that only 1300 on average are transacted on a daily basis, does it make sense to waste space giving 400 additional SKUs or not? So what we realized was it makes sense to give a large number of pick faces so that the replenishment efforts come down. At the same time, you will also see that the number of pick faces assigned are more than 1700, which means there are some SKUs which are consumed in larger quantities as well. So the bottom line in any of these 3 slides that I presented earlier is that look at your data and then decide how you should choose your strategies of picking, put away, and implement that in the warehouse. So the first slide references the fact that the tool is just an enabler. For the most part, most of these tools, including EWM, will be able to deliver whatever you expect out of it. The key question is to ask what it is that you want from that tool to deliver. And these analysis, or this phase of analysis to drive this decision making, makes it a much more efficient and smoother process. So that's the message in sleeves. So the second thing we talked about was how do you leverage the opportunity, the IT opportunity, to re-engineer your processes. Now, most of the time, we come up with this statement very often, that I've been doing it this way for the last 10 years, 20 years, why should I change? Now, if you do not do anything differently, you will not achieve anything differently. So if you begin with this premise and ask yourself, what can I do differently to gain productivity by 5%? What can I do differently so that my cost to serve comes down? How can I make myself more efficient? If you begin yourself asking these questions, then the way you look at your process design also will be significantly different. So use the IT implementation as an opportunity to question yourselves on the basics, fundamentals, take a holistic view of your operations, keep in mind the constraints of your infrastructures, look at the growth aspirations that you have, and then blend that into your project. Not only do the IT project, but also the implementation of the process changes along with it. So many times, this new software, or the software that you choose to implement, for example, EWM, will come up with lots of additional functionality. Now, your process in your existing facility would have been premised on also the capability of the existing tool. So if you were to just replicate your process in the new tool, you would not have even leveraged the tool's complete capability to achieve something different and more efficiently. So especially when it comes up with topics like these, and you have the tool which has a higher capability, use that as an opportunity to question yourself whether what we're doing is right, should we change, and how should we change, and use data to kind of make that decision on how to change. So this is an illustration from another customer of ours. So they have predominantly 3-4 areas in their facility. It was a re-engineering exercise that we did for them and then implemented EWM for them. So they have a pick by light zone. They have a sorting to light zone, sort by light, they just call it sort by light. And they have a multi-order case picking zone that they did from racking directly. Now, in the entire portfolio of SKUs, for which SKUs did it make sense to do multi-order case picking? So obviously the right answer would not have been to implement multi-order case picking for the entire portfolio. We generally would not want to choose one system for the entire thing because that's probably not the efficient system for all the SKUs in any case. So if you use the two-dimensional classification and fit that, you find that at least for the high volume movers, which are the A and B classes, and frequently touched items, the F and M classes, it makes sense to do multi-order case picking. For fast movers, I would want to do an order picking and do it by pick to light. And for the slow movers, I look at the entire batching potential and then do a sort by light. Because the number of hits that you receive on a daily basis is low. So that's how we kind of look at the entire data and then design the process. Now in designing the wave, what you see in this slide is, since there are different methods that exist, we need an overall encompassing wave strategy that takes care of order turnaround time and takes into account that. Along with that, of course, you have some other criteria also that you should take into account. For example, how your routes are planned, whether you should do wave creation automatically, how should it be linked to your execution priorities and then get implemented in your warehouse. Third item is the typical focus of IT testing that revolves around unit testing, integration testing, and system UAT testing. So this has been the typical approach. What we obviously do beyond this is to look at how you analyze and test your exception scenarios. That's a critical key element to making your testing phase and your implementation successful. Master data validation is probably the single biggest pain point when you go live and you face issues in your go live. So that's something that you need to test beforehand before you take your system into go live. In cases where there's a lot of automation and complex infrastructure requirements in your facility, simulator and emulator testing makes a lot of sense to do. So we include that as a part of your testing process so that your testing is more robust and effective. And of course, when you have multi-site rollouts and implementations, the automation of these testing processes, the automation test scripts, serves a great deal in reducing your time and making your testing more exhaustive and robust. And of course, like I mentioned, training and change, very important aspect. This needs to begin at the grassroots level, even as early as the blueprinting exercise, to make sure that the users are familiar with the product features and functionalities. So that when they go into the blueprinting, they demand additional functionality and change of processes as a part of the 2B. So the training and change doesn't begin with the system having been set up, configured, and then train them and teach them on how to use it. It begins as early as the blueprinting discussion as well. So that's some of the things that we do.
You're doing great.
Thank you. So the other thing that we do as a part of the change management is also kind of expose the users to a test bed environment. So kind of create a small pilot conference room, very similar to the facilities that they are going to operate with equipment and racking locations, etc. So that they have a comfortable location where they test out their scenarios and configurations before they actually go live, and give them a room and to learn and play around with that. And of course, testing and certification. This is completely internal testing and certification, so that they have been able to grasp what has been taught. There's a refresher course. They go online. They have access to these materials, and then they use that over a period of time, even as the implementation has gone forward. Just quick thoughts on some of the other things that you need to take care of while you're doing an EWM implementation so that it's successful. Design the systems for scalability. So what you're designing for today might just meet your need today, but if you're intelligent about how you design your solution, you'll also be able to make sure that there's minimal change in your systems, IT systems, when you're adding up new businesses. For example, if you add a new e-com business in your portfolio, If you've kept in mind that you need to do it over a period of 3 or 5 years, you would have probably built a solution which is kind of scalable across the growing years as well. The simplification of the IT landscape is definitely required, and merge that theme with your EWM project as you go ahead. In things like how the integration between systems has to happen. Some of these systems might be redundant going forward when EWM comes in because of its host of features and functionalities. Many a times, because we're living with legacy and baggage, there have been so many modifications that you've done to your base ERP systems. It's an opportunity to look at that and see how we can rationalize those customizations and bring more solutions to the standard. And look at EWM in the context of a larger roadmap. Like I mentioned, look at how your infrastructure in the facility is changing, how your people need to be trained, how to bring in new technologies, and then blend that with the project so that it gives you a holistic thing. And of course, building an ecosystem is a significant lever in making your implementation sustainably efficient. So most implementations, even if they're successful, over a period of time they begin to degrade because we've not invested time in keeping up the maintenance of the system. So the users who carry on with the system once the implementation is done, they need to be enabled to be able to kind of take it forward, make some minor changes and tweaks as the process evolves and make it successful as we go ahead. So, what do you?
Prakash, well done,
Yep.
thank you, I appreciate it. Let me grab the little slide clicker real quick. All right, so on the Moen side of the journey, I guess first off, I should probably let you know a little bit about Moen. For folks that don't know, Moen's the #1 faucet brand in North America. You probably have one in your house, even if you don't know us by name. But we do more than that. We also have sinks, we have garbage disposals, we have bath accessories, safety hardware for tubs, showers, stuff like that. Right, and so #1 in sales overall, we're a part of the Global Plumbing Group, which sits inside of Fortune Brands Home and Security. Fortune Brands Home and Security has things like Master Lock, Sentry Safe, Master Brand cabinets, Therma-Tru doors. So truly home and security kind of stuff, right? And so as we started working with Stellium, and we kind of sat back and we looked at where we were sitting right now, and right now we have some distribution centers throughout the U.S. And some large manufacturing plants on the eastern side of the U.S. Our DCs, our larger DCs right now, run on an older system, a couple decades old, and we recognize that that's probably not going to give us opportunity to grow and to get more efficient. So we started this journey to figure out what we wanted to do. And to Prakash's point earlier, we sat back and we said, what is it we want to achieve at our end state? We wanted to achieve the idea that we were going to be more productive, more efficient. And so we set out with that goal and started on that journey like that. To do that, here's 4 things that we talked about as items that we want to be at our end state. Things we wanted to be able to do that we can't necessarily do right now. That list is much longer than 4. It would go around several times here if we had everything listed. But one of the things was standardized and modernized processes, not just within one DC, but across our DCs. We have organic and inorganic growth that goes on. And so if we have a company that we acquire, we also want to be able to make that scalable and repeat that process into new companies that we may or may not acquire in the future. And so as part of this getting forward, we approached Stellium a little bit more than a year ago and talked to them about what it is that we wanted to do as we move towards SAP EWM. And we've been partnering with them since. So on that journey, so it says here the journey started in 2016. The real kind of seeds were planted in 2014. They started to germinate in 2015 and then really took off in 2016. So we've been on this journey for quite some time, and we're going to wrap this thing up 2019 timeframe. So to go through that journey, we did all our due diligence that you might expect, right? We looked at every top tier WMS, looked at them, set up more matrices to compare those companies than you can possibly imagine. Sometimes we compared apples to apples, sometimes apples to oranges, sometimes apples to zebras to try to get down to what we were doing. Yes, sir.
So I had a question. So are you guys on SAP prior to EWM?
We are not. We are not. We are moving to EWM. I'm sorry. Let me back up. Moen is an SAP company.
Okay.
We are not on WM as part of our warehouse management. We're on another system.
Okay. And so when you said you looked at all the top tier WMS vendors, so I'm assuming some of the non-SAP.
Yes.
WM, and what was the biggest reason for not choosing them?
Boy, let me ruminate on that one for a second. Like I said, there are so many matrices. One was things that we wanted to leverage, and things that we wanted, where we saw we could gain productivity. One of the things that helped us in landing on EWM, quite honestly, was we're already in SAP shop. That integration would be much simpler than going after, say, in Manhattan or some such, right? And so that was a piece of it.
So now are you guys on S4 or ECC?
No.
To either?
What are we on, Prakash?
They're an ACC, but they have a roadmap for their S4 journey
Thank
as
you.
well.
Okay.
So sometime during the course of this year, I think they'll also be migrating to S4.
So then what happens to your EWM, current EWM implementation? Do you kind of just keep that until, and so I guess the future rollouts, will that be separate outside of S4 or will it be embedded in S4? Or?
So for the large facilities that they're working on, because of their fact of not having migrated to S4 already, so it's going to be a decentral EWM implementation. But nothing really changes when you have to bring that solution on board for other facilities as well going forward. Now the choice that they will have to kind of come to, or decision they have to come to when they are looking out for their S4 journey, is whether they want to leverage the embedded S4 EWM thing or not. But nothing stops them from using the entire functionality as it stands in the recent version also. So keeping that in mind, we were clear that we want to have a centralized but non-embedded EWM for them.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was curious about, because if you're halfway in on one side and then you want to, if you get an S4 now, you have the option of embedded, which will always be far better option than a decentralized option.
Yeah.
Unless you have a large volume. And
They
you're
do.
worried about,
Yeah, they do.
And,
So volume is a significant player of that decision making. Yes.
Those technical questions look directly at Prakash.
Okay. So
I'm a dumb operations guy, right? I can tell you how we're doing it in the field. He can tell you all the really, really cool stuff.
all right, then I will ask you a question for you.
All right.
So he had mentioned something about like, so when I guess your company went and did the SKUs and kind of identified some opportunities.
Yeah.
So at that time, Moen has to do some process changes, right? So how did you get the business to kind of approve those process changes? Because that is, in my experience, that has been the most difficult thing in everything I've ever done. And
Sure.
I've done a few things.
Yeah.
That's always very tough. And so during that time, when the process changes take place, what are you guys doing? Like, because there shouldn't be a whole lot of work for the implementation team, because it's more on the business side. So I guess it's a hybrid question for the two of you.
Sure.
How did you guys tackle that? And
Sure. Do you want to take the technical side first?
Yes, so just put it in perspective, right? The kind of change that Moen is going through by the end of 2019 and 2020, and just to, if I may, it's just a part of a larger roadmap. So
It is.
what you see here is just a small piece of their large roadmap, and the process changes that you're talking about. There's a lot of infrastructure changes that's happening at Moen.
Okay.
So all that has been integrated into a single unified plan, and EWM fits in as
I
a
got
piece of the puzzle.
so it wasn't EWM driving kind
No,
of the
no.
major process. Okay.
Yeah, there's a larger program that's happening right now within the company
Okay.
that goes through multi-distribution centers. It is equipment upgrades, facility upgrades, all of that that goes with it, that has set a series of dominoes of change,
Gotcha.
including process change, which has made the company much more receptive to that change, that they knew it was coming. And when you go back to really 2014, when we started socializing this and telling them that this is what's coming, this is what we want to do, expect major changes coming up, it took a couple of years, in all honesty, to get them to the point where in 2016 we were able to forge ahead, and now we have a large commitment to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So, as a 12-member dedicated core team, could you elaborate on what types of people were in that core team?
Yes, I have. I was coming up to that next. I had just gotten here when this man sidetracked me. No, excellent questions. Yeah, no, that's the next thing. So what we did, we literally took 12 people in IT and operations at DC level, at headquarters level, and have taken them out of their normal jobs and cut ties. We may pick up the phone and get 5 minutes of consulting saying, hey, have you ever seen this before? What was it, right? But aside from that, their job for 12 to 18 months, as long as this project lasts, is the WMS and getting that up and running. And so it's a large commitment to the project from the company, recognizing that. Now, to keep us whole, we have backfilled those positions. Those people know that, hey, you're here for 12 to 18 months to be that backfill. But it has allowed us to go through our entire blueprinting process and get us ready for implementation as we go through.
And part of the answer to the previous question is also this, the fact that the commitment towards the project is so high that out of a 12-member team, maybe only 3 or 4 may be core IT in this 12-member team. So the business is involved to such an extent in being able to digest this kind of a change that change has begun as early as having formed the team itself.
Gotcha. Because so for us, like a challenge that I face
Yeah.
in IT, so supply chain does not really involve themselves in making decisions like we want this. That's really about all the commitment.
Yeah.
And so now, to get to that, obviously it's sometimes it's phase 1, 2, 3 because it takes a few phases.
Sure.
But if there's no commitment or I guess a sponsor from supply chain, it really just kind of hangs out there because it's not a priority for anyone to kind of come back and make decisions. Because in IT, we can't make decisions. We just enable whatever process that you'd like to get to, I think.
Right, absolutely. And we've actually, socialized this to the point that we have co-sponsorship from our VP for Global Supply Chain and Global Operations. Our VP for IT is right there. It's really three sponsors, tri-sponsorship. So we're all in on making this thing work. And to Prakash's point earlier, it's not just an IT solution. We have to find a way to make that work within the business itself.
Exactly.
Right? And so we've been very fortunate to have a great working relationship with our IT folks, and there's a great give and take there. The key on all of that was making sure that it's scalable. I mentioned inorganic growth that we could have there, and making sure that we can use that as a template to go to other facilities as we employ EWM currently and then for future use. So some of the things that we looked at in terms of areas that we can improve upon, one of the things was slotting. Right now, our current our current WMS does not have slotting capability. So it's one guy with a series of Excel spreadsheets, a lot of pivot tables, and some of that to see what we can do for slotting to make it productive and most efficient. And on the next slide, what you're going to see is a heat map that tells you we're not all that efficient at it, and we've been fortunate enough to move into with Stellium's help, a slotting tool that's going to help us move into where we want to be. So just think of this as a pick-to-belt right here, starting here. This is closest over to the dock doors. What you would love to see is all of your really, really hot stuff sitting in this area, all the red, right? You can see clearly that is not how we were laid out. This is a very inefficient slotting that we have going on within our pick-to-belt, or had going on. And so now, as we go through the tool that they have provided, we're able to go ahead and move this around and get us into a better heat map than what you see here. Right? So that's something that we've just started undertaking, and I wish I had an updated heat map for you. I don't. But I will guarantee you that you won't see this rainbow of colors going on over here. It'll be much more yellow, green, and white over there, as opposed to what you see right now. All right, so another area that we looked at was wave strategy and releasing things in a better way to get more productive. And remember, this is the whole point of this is taking that and driving forward with data. I mentioned before, I'm just a dumb operations guy. I have a love-hate relationship with data. I know I need it. I know I need it to make good, sound business decisions for the distribution center. But I hate data mining. That's not what I like to do at all, so I have folks that do it for me. And one of the things we found out is when we look at how we're releasing orders, about 84% of our orders are being released between 1 carton and 200 cartons. Now, in the past, what we have done, before we looked at all the data and saw what was going on, we were just kind of level loading in terms of total carton volume. What our release strategy was, made it very, very inefficient for what was going on in shipping, right? And so if we were able to actually take those 84% and put those into, and group those together, we're able to make it a more of a pull system in shipping versus what we're trying to push them. When you release a variety of orders across the scale here, it's going to be very slow for closing out of orders and getting those prepped for shipment, right? And so we're able to now leverage that based on the data provided into something that's more efficient for what we're doing in the DC. And then another area, it doesn't show up very well, but you see red numbers here in those 3 areas. And so what this volume versus velocity really says is that 12% of our SKUs are driving 62% of our pick lines every day and 76% of our replenishments every day, right? And so what I really need to, in order to get more efficient, if I look at this data, is to sit there and say, okay, 76% means I don't have enough of a replenishment basin. Where can I put these SKUs that makes it a larger replenishment basin so I don't have to replenish as often, right? And so those 12% should be removed from that each pick storage location, put it in a separate location that allows you the opportunity to replenish less often and frees up those other workers to go out and do other picks and other store tasks, etc. All right, on this one, one more area of improvement. If we took a look at what we were doing right now, we really don't do any sort of cross-docking between DCs or cross-docking, having something come in, keeping it staged in a forward location. When we looked at a group of 178,000 pallets received, we saw that about 40%, roughly 40% of those are either going to go right back out the same day or the next day. And so having little Johnny Forklift come in, take it from receiving, go 200 yards into the warehouse, drop it off, only for Jimmy Forklift to go 10 minutes later, grab it, and bring it back to the front of the warehouse for shipping, makes no sense at all. And so if we are able to take that 40% out of those and put those into a forward located location for cross-docking, creates that more efficiency. This is stuff that we didn't recognize before we sat down, looked at the data, and saw these areas for improvement. And that brings us to closing remarks. How'd I do?
6 more minutes.
6 more minutes. That means you guys got 6 minutes for Q&A. That's perfect. I'm sorry, her hand was up.
No problem.
So the data that you're using to drive a lot of this decision making came out of your legacy warehouse management. So then you went and adjusted your processes prior to your implementation of EWM, or it was just part of your rollout?
So keeping in mind that this is a larger, part of a larger plan, there's other construction and implementation that has to take place as part of that process change. Some of that we haven't gotten to yet. And so as part of the planning for that, when we open up those new areas, we'll be able to include a cross-docking area, stuff like that.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So in terms of scoping of implementation of EWM,
Yeah.
what is the size of the typical warehouse? And can you comment on the timings, what is the timeline you
So
looked
we're
at?
looking at 2 facilities over an 18-month period,
Okay.
which includes not just the EWM, but also the other infrastructure changes that's happening over the period. So for you to see the success of 2 EWMs, it's an 18-month for very large facilities. Very large facilities.
And in terms of slotting, right, and you mentioned that you used a tool from Stadium. So what is the typical process of the tool? Like, do you come and do the evaluation, or do you provide the tool to the customer?
So here, the tool that we were talking about is the interim tool for us to get the slotting in place before it goes into EWM. The EWM inherently also has capability of slotting. So we're using the EWM functionality and capability till the time, or from the time that EWM is rolled out, but to get it in place, why should I really wait for EWM to go live to see a slotting and productivity improvement in my facility from the time that I've identified that potential and EWM goes live? So that's itself maybe a 4-month, 5-month period. So that's the interim tool that they've used. We've kept it much simple within the same framework, enhanced logic, but given that as a precursor to start using it in EWM.
And so just to add to your point of two DCs in 18 months, that's what we partnered with you for. Then a little bit of a teach a man to fish kind of thing. We will do implementations on our own following that at follow-on distribution centers.
Just really quick, just kind of back on, you talked a little bit about cross-docking and kind of planning and this sort of thing. One of the regular questions that we get from our DC, I'm not a DC person, but an operations person, and so we do a lot of, our group kind of pushes a lot of the sales orders to the DC, but our DC struggles with, they have a legacy system as well, and they struggle with transparency to kind of workload planning and ability to see, you know, to staff to support, you know, big waves of orders as they come down. Does this solution that you're moving into allow you to, how will you, how will it let you do that? Versus what you're doing today?
So there is functionality. If you remember, one of the key elements of their requirements of getting a new process or EWM tool was labor management. So as a part of this functionality that EWM provides, you have the ability to do a labor demand planning. You have the ability to do a simulation, looking at the orders that are flowing in and have flown in, kind of give you a feel of how many people are required in each area of your warehouse as well, and then decide how you want to staff your facility going forward.
Is that based on, obviously the order management system is probably a different SAP module, but is that labor management just based on inbound delivery dates, or how does it?
That's correct.
Okay, got it. That's really interesting.
So it looks at the delivery dates, the promise dates, outbound delivery, inbound both together, and then kind of creates a simulation model. Of course, not all deliveries flow in for the execution on that day well in advance. So the simulation that you do today will get fine-tuned tomorrow and day after tomorrow, and on the day of simulation you will probably know. So you can kind of build up a model where with the deliveries that you have on Monday morning, if you're predicting the workload for the next week, you will probably take an 80% estimate on the data that has already flown in, and then factor it up by the 20% for that week.
Is that simulator, is that part of the WMS?
Integral to the EWM model.
It is. Okay.
It is integral.
Okay. All right.
And we have that same problem right now in our legacy.
Yeah. We struggle so much.
Yeah, and so you always wind up overstaffing
Right.
because you got to service the business,
Right.
right? And so there's gains to be had there.
Right.
Ma'am, did you have your question?
I did. So back to when you were talking about the crosstalk, does this system have the insight to see the goods inbound before it gets there, so that you don't have this be punishment where Johnny the forklift took it? Right,
Yes,
so
sure.
that you can see it before it gets there, so those receipts get isolated to a certain.
That's correct. That's correct.
First of all, thank you for using my nomenclature on Johnny Forklift. That was awesome. But yes, it does. It's a part of it, right?
It does. So there are broadly two ways of how you can do cross-docking. One, you know that even before the stock comes into your facility, it must go through the cross-docking route. So this is called planned cross-docking. Then you also have opportunistic cross-docking. So the moment the goods land in your staging area, in your GR zone, the system identifies that this can be cross-docked immediately. So then you have opportunistic cross-docking as well. So you have both of these functionalities as a part of the standard in EWM.
And if I can just foot stomp one piece, one of the things, and you alluded to it earlier, was the idea that people are going to want to hold on to what they've done for the last 10 or 20 years. As we were figuring out what our future state wanted to be, and as we were blueprinting our way into what the future will be, it was, no, we can't change that, we do it this way. Guys, this is a once in a generation chance to get more efficient. And like he said earlier, if you're going to do it the same way, then you're going to get the same results. And beg and plead with your folks to understand and recognize the opportunity that you have at hand to really, really have a true legacy type event to change things for the future for the better. Sorry, she had her hand up again first.
So I'm
She's
just
quicker than a
curious,
hiccup.
so everyone, you always hear EWM is system driven versus other WMS solutions are not, right? Is there any statistics from these projects that you've seen that without doing these proactive activities, from taking a data-driven approach, that they're more successful of an implementation, or?
So I don't know whether I can give you numbers or statistics on it, but I can tell you for a fact that there have been many failed implementations that we've gone and corrected. So what we've had to do in each of those cases was go back to the basics and say, why is it that you're doing it this way? Your data doesn't seem to suggest. For example, one of the customers that I showed you a snapshot of was they had done their picking for an automated, for a large 400,000 square feet facility, with lights, with conveying and a lot of automation. They'd gone about it wrong. I mean, they had not really planned for all the exceptions. They had not really done their slotting properly. So they began with their EWM, but when we were called in, we said, look, your basics are not right. So while we are tweaking their existing running engine to deliver at least the basic 10%, 20% of their workload as they are doing it today, we had to kind of go back and reconfigure and kind of not make it a re-implementation, but at least kind of do a parallel track of getting it back to shape as well. So for a clear fact, at least the 16, 17 implementation that we've done in the last 3 years, we've not really, touch wood, faced a failure on EWM in our projects so far. I mean, and I don't hope to, and I hope we only evolve on this. But I mean, we've had cases of the others not succeeding if they don't do it this way at least.
So how do
I'm sorry, I'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
So yeah, my question is around, because in one of the slides you mentioned that you use tool capability to re-engineer your process, right? So at Moen transformation, did you first select EWM system and then start working on the business process re-engineering, or vice versa? And my second question is related to that. I mean, did you come across any of such a scenario which they really have to have their own the business process re-engineering, but that cannot be fit into EWM system?
So you remember that as a part of the tool selection, Moen spent a lot of time in evaluating at a feature functionality level which tool has the ability or capability to deliver it or not. So a lot of deliberation and time has gone into selecting the tool, keeping the future requirements also in mind. For example, many of the things that they have not embarked upon right now, for example, it could be automation systems or AGVs and things like that, would be they were fundamental to selecting the tool. That I know I have to do AGVs in the future, so does your tool support that or not? So these were part of that decision-making process. So EWM in a way was selected, keeping in mind the future requirements as well. But when we go into blueprinting, like I said, for 85-90% of the time, if you ask the tool in its standard to give you a certain functionality, it is able to do it. The crux lies in being able to design your solution intelligently around it within the framework of the standard. But of course, customizations are relevant. For example, if you want higher visibility of your labor demand planning, etc., we've looked at very minimally invasive customizations to give you that visibility. So of course, customizations are part of the scheme of things. But I mean, if you design a solution intelligently, you can kind of not shape the code, but still be able to achieve it. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, man. So you mentioned most of the implementations are successful, right? So what are the couple of things you would see in the beginning that not being successful? Like
Why they are not successful? See, I mean, it's not a one or two or specific items. Like it's a recipe. If you do not have a committed team, I mean, I can tell you for a fact that it's going to be a huge factor if the core team was not dedicated in making it successful. I mean, you mentioned that your IT team and business teams, you find it difficult to get them on the same page. That's definitely going to be one of the reasons why you will fail if you don't do. So if you don't look at the exception scenarios, for example, most people get it right and getting happy flows. We call it happy flows because they are the simplistic, normally operating scenarios that you see in the warehouse. But if you've not really planned for the exceptions, it need not be necessarily handled in the system, but at least you've got to educate the users about how to handle it when it comes into the daily work area. So I mean, from every slide, I can give you examples on why things fail. Some more for the others than other companies, but it's really a recipe.
And from a simple operations guide perspective, that piece right there, that total commitment is massive. You would definitely agree.
Yeah, so I think that's 80% of your success.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will just have cost overruns, because no one's gonna
Yep.
think, they're just gonna.
Yeah, these folks are truly dedicated to the point that, 11 weeks straight, we had them sequestered at different sites, and that's all they did with their lives. Wave, kiss their spouses and kids goodbye, go and come back in 11 weeks, and we'll see how you're doing. And it made all the difference in getting us and launching us forward to where we're going.
Yes.
So one thing that got alluded in your presentation, I think your talks was related to slotting. So my question is related to that area itself, right? So what rules and mechanisms does EWM has to offer that makes the slotting process like a more dynamic and proactive approach rather than reactive? Because something, right, that you do not want at the end of this product goes live, right?
Yeah.
Down the lane is, you invested so much time in redesigning and reinventing, right, your space, right? And you realize 6 months later that, oh, this is not working, so let's breathe in, take 2 more months and redesign everything, right? So what is it that makes it proactive and dynamic?
So, as a part of the functionality of EWM, you have things like looking at the number of order lines, how much stock you want to plan in your storage systems, things like product characteristics, and being able to decide slotting, and how frequently you want to run your slotting. So the host of factors that go into the determination of the slotting rules as such, product lines, volumes, stocks. You can also integrate it with your future demand expectations, your SPP or your APO feeding into your demand requirements for your slotting, and then run the slotting as a tool and give you a function, and it works integrate with a functionality called rearrangement. So when you do the slotting plan and slotting run, it will give you a proposal saying that these bins are marked for improvement, which means it already has some stock in it. Let's consume that and place the right SKU on it the next time when it comes. So you could choose to do something like this, or you can say it's such a critical item in my prime zone that I want to rearrange it. So you can kind of mark it for a rearrangement and then take it to a rearrangement task. So there is some element to a standard operating process that you need to create, which says that every Monday morning I run the slotting, I look at the rearrangement task, make a cost-benefit analysis of whether rearrangement makes sense, but it's better to kind of wait it so that the stock is consumed out, and then take it forward. So there is some element of an operating process around it, but the tool gives you all the insights and create all these tasks in the background and so on.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so your pick-to-light system, is it limited to small items or case picking, or is it also bulky items? And do you use guided forklifts to help, navigate around the vehicles?
So as we have it right now at mine, it is the pick to light right now is at each pick level, not at the case pick level, and we don't have guided forklifts at this point.
But-
that is also potential improvement. So.
Absolutely.
So what the tool does give capability of, in terms of guiding the operator, is kind of planning a picking or a put away path. So that's possible in the framework. So the operator doesn't know that he's being guided to the next location based on a certain logic that's been kind of inbuilt. But the tasks that come onto the operator will be based on that queue and path. So it's not like you don't get a GPS visual navigation system, but the system drives you to specific bins depending on the path which is optimal. That definitely exists.
Did we nail it? Felt like we nailed it for us. Nice job, man.